What do you imagine when you think of the International Space Station? Gleaming white walls, sterile, futuristic laboratories, the cold, clean scent of advanced technology. Wrong. Picture this. You've just completed a grueling journey, rocketing 400 kilometers above the Earth. The hatch to the ISS opens, you float inside, weightless and awestruck. But the first thing that truly hits you isn't the mind-blowing view of the planet below. It isn't the magic of zero gravity. It's the smell. A distinct, powerful and utterly unique odour that every astronaut knows intimately. It's a strange perfume of burnt steak and hot metal, a sharp tinge of antiseptic, and the undeniable, ever-present scent of hard-working human bodies. This isn't a pristine spaceship from a movie, it's a home, a workshop, a gym, and it has the smell to prove it. But how is that possible? This is a multi-billion-dollar marvel of engineering, the most advanced outpost humanity has ever built. The reality is, the ISS is a completely sealed environment. A massive, orbiting tin can that has been continuously inhabited for over 2 decades. Nothing gets out. Every scent from the humming electronics, the specially packaged food, and the astronauts themselves just stays. It's less of a spaceship and more of a sealed, aging, impossibly complex attic. And that is exactly what makes the story of life aboard so incredible. Today, we're going behind the polished NASA footage to reveal the brutal, unglamorous, and absolutely amazing truth of what it takes to survive for months on end in orbit. We'll uncover how these brave explorers deal with challenges you've never even thought of, from the mind-bending logistics of trash disposal in zero-G to the surprising psychology of eating a meal when your plate wants to float away. By the end of this journey, you'll understand that the real miracle of the ISS isn't just the technology. It's the staggering resilience of the human heroes who call it home. If you're proud of the pioneers pushing the boundaries of human exploration, type hero in the comments below. Now let's open the airlock on the secrets of life in space. So, we've talked about the smell, but what about the sound? Science fiction has sold you a lie. In space, no one can hear you scream. While that might be true in the terrifying vacuum outside, the reality inside the International Space Station is the exact opposite. It's an environment of constant, unrelenting noise. Picture a machine the size of a football field, packed with thousands of vital, life-sustaining systems. We're talking about fans circulating breathable air, pumps pushing coolant through miles of tubing, and CO2 scrubbers humming away 24/7. This isn't a silent, sterile laboratory, it's a factory, and that factory never ever shuts down. The result is what astronauts call the acoustic assault. The average background noise on the ISS hovers between 65 and 75 decibels. To put that in perspective, a quiet conversation is around 60 decibels. This means the station's quietest moment is louder than a busy office, and it often reaches the level of a vacuum cleaner running right next to your head for 6 months straight. But here's the truly brutal part that nobody tells you. This isn't just an annoyance, it's a legitimate health hazard. Constant exposure to that level of noise will cause permanent, irreversible hearing loss. It's one of the most insidious dangers of long-duration spaceflight. So how do our heroes survive this invisible threat? The solution is as simple as it is extreme. They wear earplugs. All the time. They work, eat, and even sleep with foam plugs stuffed in their ears, choosing to live in a muffled world to protect their hearing. Imagine that for a moment. You're floating inside one of the greatest technological achievements in human history, but you have to block out the very sound of the machine that's keeping you alive just to prevent it from deafening you. It's one more incredible, unglamorous sacrifice that proves the true challenge of the ISS isn't the technology. It's the sheer mental and physical toughness of the people who call it home. We've covered the overwhelming smell and the constant deafening noise, but there's another, more insidious environmental challenge that attacks the astronauts every single day. One they themselves create just by being alive. The dust crisis. On Earth, dust is a simple annoyance. Dead skin, hair, lint from your clothes. It falls to the floor, you sweep it up, and it's gone. A simple law of gravity. But what happens when you take gravity away? The answer is shockingly unglamorous. Every single one of the 40,000 skin cells you shed per minute, every stray eyelash, every tiny fibre from a t-shirt doesn't fall. It floats. it joins a permanent, invisible, ever-growing cloud of human debris that drifts through every module of the station. Think about that for a moment. The ISS isn't just a habitat, it's a sealed snow globe of microscopic human particles swirling in the air currents 24 hours a day. And this isn't just a matter of keeping the place tidy. This is a direct threat to both the crew and the station itself. This human fog is the relentless enemy of the station's life support systems. It gets sucked into ventilation intakes, clogging the critical air filters that provide the crew with breathable oxygen and scrub the CO2 from their air. If left unchecked, the very systems keeping them alive would choke and fail. But here's the personal cost that nobody talks about. This floating dust gets in your eyes, causing constant irritation. You breathe it into your lungs. It's a persistent, unavoidable hazard that can trigger allergies and respiratory issues 400 kilometers away from the nearest doctor's office. So how do these heroes combat an enemy they can't stop producing? Not with a futuristic laser shield, with a vacuum cleaner. That's right. A significant portion of an astronaut's schedule is dedicated to what is essentially housekeeping. But this is no ordinary spring cleaning. Picture this. You're floating weightless, armed with a specially designed vacuum hose, meticulously cleaning not the floor, but the walls, the ceilings, the vents, and every single surface where the air currents collect this dangerous dust. It's a tedious, never-ending battle against an invisible enemy. Another completely unglamorous, absolutely critical job that proves the survival of our pioneers in space is less about one giant leap and more about a million tiny heroic struggles every single day. We've covered the overwhelming smell, the deafening noise, and the floating cloud of human dust. But what if I told you that dust isn't just dead? What happens when it becomes the foundation for something that is very much alive? This is where we confront one of the most visceral and hidden struggles on the ISS, the biofilm battle. You've seen mold in a damp bathroom corner? Now picture this. On the International Space Station, fungi and bacteria don't just form passive patches of grime. They organize, they build colonies, complex, resilient microbial cities called biofilms that cling to the inside of the station. We're talking about dozens of species of bacteria and fungi, setting up shop behind equipment panels, inside water lines, and even on the viewport windows. But here's the truly terrifying part that NASA doesn't put in the glossy brochures. This isn't your average, everyday household mold. Up on the ISS, these organisms are constantly bombarded by levels of cosmic radiation far higher than on Earth. The result? They mutate. They become hardier, more aggressive, and frighteningly unpredictable. And they are hungry. These space-mutated biofilms don't just sit there, they actively eat the station from the inside out. They have been found to degrade rubber seals, corrode metal, and literally devour the polymers used in cables and equipment. Think about that. A silent, creeping enemy is chewing through the very fabric of the multi-billion-dollar station, posing a direct threat to its structural integrity. At the same time, spores and bacteria fill the sealed atmosphere, a constant menace to the crew's respiratory systems and overall health. So how do our heroes fight an enemy that grows, mutates, and eats their own home? Not with plasma cannons or sci-fi nanobots. They fight it with disinfectant wipes and swabs. A huge part of the astronauts' work is a constant, laborious hunt for these microbial invaders. They painstakingly swab surfaces, collect samples to be sent back to Earth for analysis, and scrub down their living quarters with specialized antimicrobial solutions. It's a grueling, never-ending war fought on a microscopic front. One more absolutely unglamorous, utterly critical struggle that our space pioneers must win every single day, just to keep themselves and their outpost alive. So far, we've fought the invisible enemies of the International Space Station, the smell, the sound, the microscopic clouds of dust and the mutant biofilms that eat metal. But now we turn to the most visible, most overwhelming, and most fundamental challenge of them all. The clutter. Forget the wide-angle NASA shots of astronauts gracefully floating down gleaming open corridors. That's a fantasy, often staged for cameras. The day-to-day reality of the ISS is not a spacious laboratory. It's a tunnel, a cramped, claustrophobic, three-dimensional maze built from bags. Picture this. You're trying to get from one module to another. You can't just float in a straight line. Instead, you have to navigate a narrow path walled in on every side, by lumpy white sacks strapped down with bungee cords and fastened with Velcro. This is the reality of the station's interior. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, they are all gone, buried under hundreds and hundreds of what are known as cargo transfer bags, or CTBs. These bags are the lifeblood of the station. They are its moving boxes, its closets, its pantry, and its tool shed, all rolled into one. Inside this wall of white is everything you need to survive for 6 months. Spare parts for the toilet, backup computers, medical supplies, freeze-dried food, new experiments, clean clothes, and thousands of other items. In a place where you can't just run to the hardware store, you have to bring your entire city's worth of supplies with you. But here's the mind-blowing part. Because of the sheer volume of stuff, the ISS is essentially a hoarder's house in zero gravity. Finding a single, specific screwdriver isn't about opening a toolbox. It's about knowing which of the 50 identical-looking bags in the Japanese module, third from the left behind the water reclamation unit, contains the correct toolkit. The astronauts don't just have to be scientists and engineers, they have to be librarians of a chaotic floating warehouse, with a mental map of where tens of thousands of items are located. This isn't poor design, it's the brutal, unglamorous reality of living in a tin can 400 kilometers from Earth. There is no such thing as unused space. Every square inch is a battlefield in the war against logistical chaos. It's another staggering, heroic adaptation. Our pioneers in space don't live in a futuristic palace. They live and work inside their own supply closet, a testament to the fact that when it comes to human survival on the frontier, practicality will always triumph over aesthetics. So, we've established that the International Space Station is the world's most expensive and complicated hoarder's house, a floating labyrinth of bags and equipment. But what happens when you lose something in that three-dimensional maze? On Earth, it's a simple problem solved by a simple law of physics, gravity. You drop your keys, they fall to the floor, you look down, you find them. But in space, there is no down. Picture this. You're an astronaut, floating in the Destiny laboratory, carefully replacing a computer module. You need a specific screwdriver, and you let it go for just 1 second to adjust your position. You turn back, and it's gone. It didn't clatter to the floor. It simply isn't there anymore. It has vanished into the air. This is the station's lost and found phenomenon, a bizarre and constant problem that every astronaut knows all too well. The real thief isn't carelessness. It's the station's own life support system. The same network of fans that pulls the deadly CO2 from the air and circulates breathable oxygen also creates a constant, gentle, and relentless series of air currents. These currents act like a silent, invisible river, slowly pulling any object that isn't tied down. But here's the truly mind-bending part. That floating screwdriver isn't just lost in the room. It gets pulled towards the nearest ventilation intake, where it gets sucked into the guts of the station. It disappears into a chaotic maze of ductwork, vanishing behind panels and into the complex machinery that keeps the station alive. And it might not be seen again for years. Literally, years. The station's lost and found box isn't a box at all. It's the collection of debris found when astronauts perform the grueling task of cleaning the station's air filters. During these cleanings, they discover treasure troves of lost items. A camera lens that vanished in 2009 might reappear in 2015. A sentimental personal photo that slipped away during one mission might be discovered by a completely different crew a decade later. They are accidental time capsules swallowed by the station itself. So how do our heroes fight an enemy that can literally make their tools disappear into thin air? The solution isn't a high-tech tracking device, it's Velcro, tethers, pockets, and an almost superhuman level of discipline. On the ISS, there is no such thing as setting something down. Every single object, from a wrench to a pen to a family photo, is either physically attached to an astronaut's suit, tethered to a handrail, or stuck to a patch of Velcro on the wall. Always, without exception. Because they know that one moment of forgetfulness doesn't just mean a lost tool, it could mean that very tool getting sucked into a critical fan, shattering the blades, and disabling a life support system. It's one more invisible war, fought minute by minute against the strange and unforgiving physics of life in orbit. A war won not by technology, but by pure, relentless, heroic discipline. So we've seen how relentless astronaut discipline, with Velcro and tethers, is the only thing stopping a single screwdriver from vanishing into the station's mechanical guts. But what about the big picture? How do you manage not just one screwdriver, but thousands of them? How does mission control keep track of hundreds of thousands of spare parts, food packs, science experiments, and personal items, all spread across a chaotic three-dimensional labyrinth the size of a football field? The answer isn't a futuristic AI or a team of helpful robots. It's a rigorous, unforgiving, and absolutely brilliant piece of logistical engineering known as the Inventory Management System, or IMS. And it effectively turns these elite test pilots and PhD scientists into the most dedicated warehouse workers in human history. Picture this. Every single item aboard the ISS, from a massive replacement pump down to a single roll of duct tape, has a unique barcode. Every single storage container, every locker, every nook and cranny on the station also has a barcode. The IMS is a massive, all-knowing database that connects every item to its exact location. But here's the truly brutal, unglamorous part. For this system to work, the astronauts have to obey it with absolute religious devotion. Think about that for a moment. You need a new battery for your experiment. You can't just float over to the supply bag where you think it is. No, you first consult a laptop. The IMS tells you that the battery you need is in the Columbus module, in cargo transfer bag number 417B. You float over, pull out the bag, and before you even unzip it, you take out your barcode scanner, you scan the bag, then you find the battery and you scan the battery. You close the bag, scan it again to confirm it's back in place, and then you float to your experiment. Once there, you scan your work area to tell the IMS that the battery is now there. Every single time. This isn't an option, it's a lifeline. Without this mind-numbing, repetitive scanning, the station would descend into total chaos within weeks. A critical piece of medical equipment would be lost. The one-of-a-kind wrench needed to fix the toilet would be untraceable. The entire multi-billion-dollar enterprise would grind to a halt because someone forgot to scan a bag of freeze-dried shrimp. It is the ultimate expression of the reality of space exploration. A war fought not with joysticks and lasers, but with barcode scanners and relentless heroic bookkeeping. Another invisible, absolutely critical battle that our pioneers must win every single minute of every single day. So we've learned about the inventory management system, the all-knowing barcode database that tracks every single item on the station. A perfect system, right? A digital solution to the chaos of clutter. You just look up an item on a laptop and you know exactly which bag it's in. Problem solved. Not even close. Because the IMS can tell you a spare part is in a specific bag, but it can't help you with the brutal physical reality of actually getting to that bag. For that, you have to enter a special kind of logistical hell, a place astronauts know simply as the PMM. The Permanent Multipurpose Module, or PMM, is the station's garage, its storage unit, its attic, and it is the physical manifestation of the stowage nightmare. We're not talking about a few bags strapped to a wall here. We're talking about a space packed so densely from floor to ceiling that it is essentially a solid block of cargo transfer bags. Picture this. You're an astronaut, and the IMS has just told you that a critical replacement pump for the water recycler is located in a bag deep in the heart of the PMM. You float into the module, and you're confronted with a wall of white bags. The one you need is somewhere in the middle. You can't just pull it out. No. First, you have to unstrap the outermost layer of bags. Then you have to find somewhere to temporarily tether these giant clumsy sacks in the already cramped space around you, all while making sure they don't block a critical vent. Then you start on the next layer, and the next. This is a game of human Tetris. A three-dimensional zero-gravity puzzle where you have to excavate through tons of equipment just to retrieve one item and then painstakingly repack the entire mess. This isn't a 10-minute job. Retrieving a single item from the depths of the PMM can take hours, sometimes half a workday. Think about the staggering reality of that. These are elite scientists and test pilots, their time in orbit valued at over $100,000 per hour, spending a huge chunk of their day physically wrestling with bags in a floating storage unit. It's the ultimate unglamorous truth of life on the final frontier. You can have all the futuristic technology in the universe, but survival can still come down to the brute force and heroic patience required to win a game of Tetris with a bunch of oversized luggage. So we've seen the logistical nightmare of the PMM, where retrieving one item is a multi-hour game of human Tetris. But that raises a massive question. If the station is already packed to the breaking point, what happens when new stuff arrives? The answer comes with a gentle bump and a hiss of locking clamps. The arrival of a resupply ship, a SpaceX Dragon or Northrop Grumman Cygnus, bearing thousands of pounds of precious cargo from Earth. For the crew, it's Christmas morning in the cosmos. Fresh food, new science experiments, spare parts, mail from home. But that magical moment is brutally short, because the arrival of new supplies doesn't signal a break. It kicks off the most frantic and physically demanding period of the entire mission, the cargo scramble. Picture this. The crew has a handful of weeks to accomplish a monumental task: unpack over 3 tons of cargo and then repack the entire ship with trash. That's over 6,000 pounds of equipment that must be moved, item by item, from the new ship into the already cluttered station. It's like having an entire moving van show up at your house and being told you have to unload it and then reload it with all your junk, all before the truck has to leave. But here's the truly mind-blowing part that turns this from a chore into a high-stakes physics problem. You can't just toss bags of trash into the departing cargo vehicle. Every single item, from a broken piece of equipment to a bag of used food pouches, must be weighed, logged, and loaded according to a precise computer-generated map. Why? To maintain the ship's center of mass. Think about that for a moment. This isn't just taking out the garbage, it's a delicate zero-gravity ballet. If the astronauts load the trash unevenly, changing the vehicle's center of mass by even a tiny fraction, it could start to tumble uncontrollably during its deorbit burn. That would doom the multi-million-dollar vehicle and its precious scientific samples returning to Earth. So an astronaut with a laptop manifest is not a garbage man. He is a human ballast calculator performing a 3-dimensional dance with trash. This 50-pound bag of failed electronics goes in bay A3. This 10-pound bag of packaging material goes in bay C7. Each piece placed perfectly to keep the spacecraft balanced for its fiery re-entry. It is the ultimate unglamorous, absolutely heroic task, ensuring the station's lifeline can safely take out the trash. So we've witnessed the high-stakes ballet of turning a cargo ship into a perfectly balanced trash barge. It seems like a clean end to a dirty problem. Wrong! Because not all trash is created equal. Within that mountain of waste, there is a special category so foul, so biologically active, that it's treated with the same seriousness as a hazardous material leak. The astronauts call it wet trash. Think about it. Every used food pouch with a tiny smear of leftover sauce, every damp cleaning wipe, every packet of coffee grounds. On its own, it's nothing. But collect this wet organic garbage, seal it in a bag, and leave it in the warm, 24/7 environment of the ISS, and something happens. It begins to live, it ferments, it rots, becoming a 5-star hotel for bacteria and fungi. But here's the truly gruesome part that you'll never see on the NASA live feed. This process of decay releases gas, a lot of it. The trash bags don't just sit there, they begin to swell. They inflate like foul pressurized balloons, threatening to burst and release their putrid contents into the station's sealed atmosphere. A single leak would not just be a disgusting mess, it would be a permanent contamination event, a smell that could never be scrubbed out. So how do our heroes contain a literal biological time bomb, not with some futuristic disintegration ray? The solution is a grueling, manual, and absolutely critical procedure known as triple containment. Every single bag of wet trash is carefully sealed. It is then placed inside a second, larger bag, often with an absorbent pad. Then, that bag is sealed inside a third, even tougher outer container. Picture that for a moment. These pioneers of the cosmos, individuals with PhDs and the skills to fly supersonic jets, must spend a significant part of their time meticulously, painstakingly bagging up rotting garbage. Not once, but 3 times. It's another hidden, heroic battle. A disgusting, vital and constant war fought not against the void of space, but against the simple, inescapable decay of yesterday's lunch. We've seen our heroes as warehouse workers, garbage collectors and biohazard specialists, painstakingly triple bagging their rotting trash. So what do you think is left? What is the glorious primary job of an astronaut on the International Space Station? Pushing the frontiers of human knowledge? conducting groundbreaking zero-gravity experiments, looking for life on other planets? Wrong. The number one job of an astronaut is being a high-tech janitor. Their primary mission isn't science, it's technological maintenance. They are the most expensive and highly trained repair crew in human history, and their only job is to stop their home from falling apart. Picture this. You're an astronaut floating in the most advanced laboratory ever built. For years, you trained for a complex fluid dynamics experiment that could change the future of manufacturing. You wake up, excited for the day. But when you check your schedule, that experiment has been cancelled. Instead, your entire day is blocked out to fix the toilet. Again. This isn't a joke, it's the brutal reality. For every hour an astronaut spends on science, they can spend 2, 3, or even 4 hours just keeping the station running. They are plumbers for the water processor assembly, the system that recycles urine into drinking water and breaks down constantly. They are electricians for the carbon dioxide removal assembly, the machine that scrubs the poison from their air and requires delicate multi-hour repairs. They are mechanics, IT technicians, and general handymen for a 20-year-old multi-billion-dollar house that was never designed for easy repairs. But here's the truly staggering part. These are not simple fixes. These critical life support systems are buried behind panels and tangled webs of wiring. They were assembled on Earth by teams of engineers in clean rooms, not by one person floating in zero-G with a socket wrench tethered to their wrist. When a pump fails, an astronaut has to follow a 100-page checklist on a video call with a team of panicked engineers in Houston, performing what is essentially open-heart surgery on the very machine that is keeping them alive. It is the ultimate unglamorous, absolutely heroic struggle. A constant, relentless war against entropy, fought with screwdrivers and software patches. The miracle of the ISS isn't just the science that gets done, it's that these incredible pioneers, these master technicians of the cosmos, manage to get any science done at all. So we've established that our heroes in space are the world's most elite repair crew, performing open-heart surgery on the station to keep it alive. We even mentioned the carbon dioxide removal assembly, the CDRA, the machine that stops them from suffocating in their own breath. But repairing it doesn't even begin to cover the brutal reality. Because every few months the Seadre's lungs need to be changed, and that task is one of the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs on the entire station. Picture this. The core of the Seadre consists of 4 cylindrical canisters, known as beds. They aren't beds for sleeping. They are filters, packed with a specialized clay-like material called zeolite. This material is a miracle. It acts like a chemical sponge, absorbing the poisonous carbon dioxide directly from the air. The system then vents that captured CO2 into the vacuum of space. But here's the truly vicious part that nobody tells you. With every cycle of absorbing and venting, the zeolite material slowly grinds itself down. It doesn't just get old, it turns into a fine, abrasive, and incredibly hazardous dust. Think about that for a moment. The very heart of the life support system is actively generating a cloud of microscopic daggers. This isn't just an inconvenience. This zeolite dust is a dire threat to the lungs. If it gets loose in the sealed atmosphere of the station, it would be a catastrophe. The fine, sharp particles are like tiny shards of glass, ready to be inhaled by the entire crew, causing permanent lung damage. So how do you perform a transplant on a machine that's full of razor-sharp dust, in a place where dust never settles, with more discipline and care than a bomb disposal expert? The astronaut assigned to the task doesn't just show up with a wrench, they become a hazmat specialist. They put on goggles, a protective mask, and gloves. The work area is prepped to contain any spill. The old saturated beds are unbolted with slow, deliberate movements. A single slip, one clumsy motion, could send a plume of toxic dust floating through the module. The old beds are then carefully, painstakingly sealed into specialized disposal bags, treated with all the seriousness of a biological sample. It is another invisible, absolutely critical war. One fought not with joysticks, but with methodical, nerve-wracking precision against an enemy they can't afford to disturb. It's the ultimate unglamorous, heroic truth. The simple act of breathing on the ISS is only possible because these pioneers are willing to risk their own lungs to keep everyone else safe. So far, we've witnessed our heroes battle invisible dust, mutant mold, and ravenous biofilms. But what happens when the threat isn't a particulate or a microbe? What happens when a simple, everyday problem like a leak occurs on the world's most complex machine? On Earth, a leak is an annoyance. Drip, drip, drip. You hear it, you see the puddle, you grab a bucket. Gravity does most of the work for you. But in the zero-gravity environment of the International Space Station, a leak is not an annoyance, it's a monster. Picture this. A pinhole rupture occurs in a cooling line. A tiny stream of water or ammonia coolant begins to seep out. It doesn't drip. There is no down. Instead, thanks to the mind-bending power of surface tension, the liquid coalesces. It gathers on itself, growing into a single, massive, oscillating sphere. A shimmering, wobbling blob of liquid that floats silently in the air, growing larger by the second. But here's the truly terrifying part that transforms this from a physics curiosity into a life-threatening crisis. This blob doesn't just float harmlessly. The same air currents that carry dust through the station begin to push it. The blob starts to drift, and due to static electricity, it is actively drawn to the one thing you never want to mix with liquid: electronics. Think about that for a moment. A massive, silent ball of fluid is now actively hunting for the station's vital organs. It wants to wrap itself around a critical avionics panel. It wants to smother a life support systems controller. It's a slow-motion, zero-gravity short-circuit waiting to happen, threatening to cripple a multi-billion-dollar outpost and the crew inside it. So how do you fight a floating blob of death? You can't just wipe it up. A clumsy move with a towel would be a catastrophe, breaking the single large mass into 1,000 smaller spheres, a literal spray of chaos that would be impossible to corral. The solution is a terrifyingly delicate ballet. Astronauts, armed with special absorbent pads and towels, have to approach the blob with the slow, deliberate care of a bomb disposal expert. They can't attack it. They have to coax it. They carefully touch the pad to the edge of the sphere, allowing the liquid's own surface tension to wick it onto the absorbent material. It's a nerve-wracking process of trying to capture a single, cohesive monster without letting it shatter into an uncontrollable swarm. It's one more unglamorous, jaw-dropping reality of life in orbit. A high-stakes battle against the fundamental laws of physics, one not with futuristic technology, but with incredible calm, heroic patience, and a very steady hand. We've just seen the horror of a floating blob of liquid hunting the station's electronics, a slow-motion, zero-gravity monster. But that silent enemy has a far deadlier twin. What happens when the leak isn't just water? What happens when it's one of the most toxic substances known to man? This brings us to the ultimate hidden danger of the International Space Station, the ammonia threat. To keep the station from either freezing in shadow or boiling in direct sunlight, it relies on a massive, complex external cooling system, and the lifeblood of that system is pure ammonia. Why? Because it's a brutally effective coolant, capable of carrying huge amounts of heat away from the station's vital electronics and into massive radiators that bleed it into space. But here's the stark contrast that astronauts live with every single day. Inside your module, you're breathing carefully scrubbed, perfectly balanced, life-sustaining air. But just inches away, on the other side of a thin metal wall, literal poison is running through miles of tubing at high pressure. And here's the truly terrifying reality that makes it infinitely worse than a water leak. If an ammonia line ruptures, you don't get a floating blob, you get a gas. An invisible, silent, rapidly expanding cloud of death. Picture this. A micrometeoroid, no bigger than a grain of sand travelling at orbital speeds, punctures an external coolant line connected to a module. A shrill alarm blares through the station. It's not a slow drip. It's a catastrophic failure. The invisible, toxic gas instantly begins flooding the module. You have seconds, literally seconds. The acrid choking smell hits you. One full breath will sear your lungs, blind you, and kill you. Your only option? Flee. Slam the hatch. Seal the module, and pray your crewmates made it out in time. So how do you fight a ghost that can kill you before you even know it's there? You don't. You run. The only defense is constant, brutal, relentless training. Every astronaut has the emergency evacuation plan for every single module burned into their memory. They have emergency breathing masks, specialized gear that can save their life, stashed within arm's reach at all times. They drill for an ammonia leak until the procedure is pure muscle memory, an automatic reaction designed to override the sheer terror of the moment. It is the station's greatest paradox. The very system that stops the station from cooking in the sun's unfiltered glare is also its most immediate and lethal threat. It's one more unglamorous, terrifying weight that these heroes carry every single day, living and working alongside an invisible killer, 400 kilometers above the Earth. We've faced silent killers like ammonia gas and the slow-motion horror of a floating water leak. But what happens when the threat isn't silent? What if the station itself started screaming at you? This brings us to one of the most unnerving and psychologically taxing realities of life in orbit, a phenomenon every astronaut must learn to endure: the structural groans. The International Space Station orbits the Earth every 90 minutes. That means every hour and a half these heroes experience a full, blistering sunrise and a deep, freezing sunset. In direct, unfiltered sunlight, the station's massive metal trusses can heat up to a scorching 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Just 45 minutes later, plunged into Earth's shadow, the temperature plummets to a bone-chilling minus 250 degrees. Think about that for a moment. A 500-degree thermal whiplash, over and over, 16 times a day. What does that do to a structure the size of a football field? It forces it to expand and contract, violently. The result is a constant, unpredictable symphony of gut-wrenching noises, sudden, sharp, metallic pops that sound like a gunshot right next to your ear, deep, resonant bangs that shudder through the entire module, and long, drawn-out, eerie groans as if the metal itself is in agony. Picture this. You're a rookie astronaut, just a few days into your mission. You've finally managed to block out the constant hum of the life support, and you're floating in your sleeping bag, desperately trying to get some rest. Without warning, a deafening crack rips through the silence, seemingly inches from your head. Your heart stops. Every primal instinct screams that the hull has been breached, that the station is breaking apart around you. But here's the truly mind-bending part that they have to learn to accept. The station isn't breaking, it's breathing. This terrifying barrage of noise is completely normal. For veteran astronauts, the groans and bangs become a familiar rhythm, a sign that the station is healthy and responding to the extreme environment as designed. But for the uninitiated, it is a brutal psychological test of nerves, a trial by fire and ice that they must endure every single day. It's one more unglamorous, absolutely heroic struggle, learning to sleep soundly while the very walls of your home are screaming that you're in mortal danger. We've listened to the station scream as it expands and contracts, a battle fought from within. But outside, in the silent vacuum, a completely different war is raging every single second. A war of 1,000 tiny cuts. The enemy isn't an alien fleet. It's a grain of sand, a fleck of paint from a satellite that broke apart years ago. This is the constant invisible hailstorm of micrometeoroids and orbital debris, or MMO'd. But these aren't idle specks of dust. They're projectiles travelling at over 17,000 miles per hour. At that speed, a grain of sand hits with the impact of a rifle bullet. Picture this. An astronaut on a 6-hour spacewalk reaches out to grab a thick, reassuring handrail. Their only anchor to the station, their lifeline against the infinite void. But here's the truly brutal part that nobody shows you. That handrail isn't smooth. It's a battlefield. Run a gloved finger along its surface and you would feel it. The station's entire outer skin, from the vast, delicate solar arrays to the simplest grab bar, is scarred, pitted with millions of microscopic craters from this relentless bombardment. And these aren't gentle dents. A hypervelocity impact creates a tiny explosion. It melts the metal, which then resolidifies into a minuscule crown of needle-sharp, razor-edged shrapnel around the crater. Think about that. The entire exterior of the ISS is a landscape of microscopic razor blades. This isn't just cosmetic damage, it's a mortal threat. An astronaut's glove is a multi-layered marvel of engineering, but it's still just fabric, rubber, and Vectron. One careless slide of the hand, one accidental brush against a pockmarked panel, and a microscopic shard can slice through those layers in an instant, causing a catastrophic leak in their pressurized suit. So how do you navigate a home that is actively trying to cut you? You can't sand it down. The solution is pure, unglamorous, heroic vigilance. Astronauts on a spacewalk don't just move, they study. They meticulously inspect their path. They check their gloves relentlessly for any sign of damage. Every single handhold is a calculated risk. Every movement is a deliberate act of survival in a zero-gravity minefield. It's a battle won not with armor, but with absolute, unwavering, heroic attention to detail. So we've seen how the station is under constant assault from the outside, a battlefield of microscopic razors. We've even heard it scream and groan as it expands and contracts. But what if one of the biggest threats to the station's entire scientific purpose doesn't come from a violent impact or a structural failure? What if it's a silent, constant, and utterly self-inflicted vibration? Welcome to the Vibration Dampening Challenge. Picture this. You're an astronaut, 2 hours into your daily mandatory workout on the station's advanced treadmill. This isn't optional. It's a life-or-death routine to stop your bones from turning brittle and your muscles from wasting away in zero-G. But every powerful stride you take, every impact of your feet doesn't just get absorbed. It sends a low-frequency shockwave rippling through the entire immense structure of the station. Add in the rhythmic clang of another astronaut working out on the resistive exercise device, and the station itself begins to hum and shudder. But here's the truly brutal paradox. The very act of survival, the daily ritual that keeps an astronaut's body from falling apart, is actively creating an earthquake inside the most sensitive laboratory ever built. Add to that the occasional jarring shudder from a thruster firing to reboost the station's orbit, and you have a structure that is in a permanent state of subtle but ruinous motion. So what? A little rattle? Wrong. For many of the multi-million-dollar experiments aboard the ISS, that vibration is a catastrophe. Imagine trying to grow a perfect protein crystal for a new cancer drug, a process that requires absolute stillness, or studying how fluids behave in perfect microgravity. A single, microscopic jitter can ruin the entire experiment, rendering years of work and millions of dollars completely worthless. So how do these heroes conduct delicate science inside a building that's constantly being shaken by its own inhabitants and its own engines? You can't just ask the crew to stop exercising, so you build a laboratory that floats. This is the mind-blowing solution. Critical science isn't done on shelves bolted to the wall. It's done inside specially designed science racks that are actively isolated from the station's structure. These are technological marvels. Using a system of sensors and actuators, the rack literally senses an incoming vibration from a footstep on the treadmill or a thruster firing, and in real time, it pushes back with an equal and opposite force, perfectly cancelling it out. It creates a tranquil, motionless bubble of true microgravity, while the rest of the station shudders around it. It's a constant, invisible war against motion itself, fought not by a person, but by an incredibly sophisticated machine, a silent guardian protecting the very soul of the station's mission. And it's one more heroic, unglamorous solution, proving that on the ISS, even standing perfectly still requires a miracle of engineering. So, we've seen the heroic engineering required to keep science experiments perfectly still inside a shuddering space station. A war fought against the tiniest vibrations. But what happens when the experiment isn't a fragile crystal? What happens when the science itself represents the single greatest fear of every astronaut who has ever lived? What happens when you deliberately start a fire? Think about it. In a sealed metal can, orbiting 400 kilometers from any help, an uncontrolled fire isn't just an emergency, it's the end. It's a fast, furious, and absolute death sentence for the entire crew. It's the ghost that has haunted space travel since the Apollo 1 tragedy. And yet our heroes on the ISS do it, on purpose, inside a special heavily shielded zone that is arguably the most dangerous place on the entire station. This is the Combustion Integration Rack, or CIR, the station's own blast furnace. But here's the mind-blowing reason why. This isn't pyromania, it's groundbreaking physics. On Earth, hot air rises, pulling a flame into the familiar teardrop shape, but in the perfect microgravity of the ISS, there is no up. A flame doesn't flicker. It becomes a perfect, shimmering, ghostly sphere. a tiny floating star of pure combustion. By studying these bizarre spherical flames, scientists on the ground learned fundamental secrets about how fire works, leading to more fuel-efficient engines on Earth and, paradoxically, better fire safety protocols for future spacecraft. But picture the sheer steel-clad courage it takes to run one of these experiments. An astronaut must carefully load flammable fuel gas into the chamber, manage the flow of pure oxygen that feeds it, and then give the command to ignite. They are willingly creating the one thing that could destroy them all, placing their faith in the walls of a metal box to contain it. It's one more unglamorous, jaw-dropping truth of life in orbit. To make space safer for the future, these pioneers must first be brave enough to face its single greatest nightmare head-on. So we've seen how our heroes master physics. They contain fire in a box and stop the station from shaking itself apart. They can control the inanimate. But what happens when the science isn't a predictable flame or a silent crystal? What happens when the experiment is alive, breathing, and completely terrified? This brings us to one of the most complex and ethically challenging missions on the station, the Rodent Research Program. These aren't pets. They are tiny astronauts, living proxies for the human body, sent into orbit so scientists can study the brutal effects of zero gravity on muscle, atrophy, bone density, and disease without risking human lives. But here's the brutal, unglamorous reality that makes this so much more than a science fair project. On Earth, a mouse cage is simple. Gravity handles the mess. In space, it's a biological nightmare. Every single waste pellet becomes a tiny floating projectile. Every drop of urine vaporizes, releasing toxic ammonia gas directly into the crew's breathing air. Uncontained, a handful of mice could poison the station's atmosphere. And then there is the heartbreaking challenge for the mice themselves. Picture this: a small animal, evolved over millions of years to understand up and down, suddenly finds itself in a world with neither. It can't walk, it can't burrow. Early experiments showed the mice frantically trying to run in midair, a stressful and disorienting sensory chaos. So how do you solve this? How do you keep both the human crew and the animal astronauts safe and healthy? Not with a simple cage. The solution is a masterpiece of bioengineering called the animal habitat, and its core technology is nothing short of brilliant. It creates artificial gravity with wind. Think about that. A constant, precisely directed flow of air circulates through the habitat. This invisible current is strong enough to gently pin the mice to the floor, allowing them to walk and interact normally. But more importantly, it forces every single piece of waste, every pellet, every drop of urine, down onto a specialized absorbent layer and into a filtration system, trapping the mess and scrubbing the toxic ammonia from the air before it ever enters the station. But here's the truly heroic part. The astronauts don't just push a button to start the experiment, they become zero-gravity veterinarians. They have to perform health checks on these disoriented creatures. They must conduct the delicate and stressful procedure of transferring them from a transport carrier to the habitat, all while a panicked animal could escape and get lost in the station's maze of modules. It's one more incredible, unglamorous responsibility, proving that on the final frontier, our heroes must not only be scientists and engineers, but also caretakers, fighting to protect the silent living sacrifices that make future human exploration possible. We've seen our heroes master fire, dodge floating water blobs, and run from toxic gas. But what happens when the threat isn't a sudden, violent catastrophe? What happens when the enemy is a slow, silent, and completely invisible bleed? This was the terrifying reality in August of 2020. No alarms blared, no lights flashed. But on the ground, in mission control centers across the world, engineers noticed a problem that sent a chill down their spines. The International Space Station was losing air. A tiny persistent pressure drop day after day, a leak, and in a sealed can flying through a vacuum, any leak, no matter how small, is a death sentence in slow motion. So, they brought out the big guns. The crew deployed sophisticated ultrasonic leak detectors, listening for a hiss that was too faint to hear. They spent weeks systematically sealing off entire sections of the station, the US segment, the Japanese module, the European laboratory, trying to isolate the problem. The result? The leak was somewhere in the Russian Zvezda module, the station's oldest living quarters. But the module was a maze of equipment and panels. Pinpointing the source was like trying to find a single faulty wire in a city's power grid. All of the planet's most advanced technology was stumped. So how do you find a microscopic hole in a metal the size of a football field when your futuristic tools have failed? You don't. You turn to one of the oldest investigative techniques known to man. Picture this. After weeks of fruitless high-tech searching, Russian cosmonaut Anatoly Ivanishin floats near the suspected area. He doesn't hold a complex sensor. He holds a tea bag. He carefully tears it open. In the zero-gravity air, the tiny dark leaves don't fall. They begin to drift, a small cloud caught in the station's invisible air currents. The entire crew, on orbit and on the ground, waits and watches. And then they see it. The invisible river of air being sucked into the vacuum of space begins to carry the tea leaves with it. Slowly but unmistakably, the floating specks of tea converge on a single spot. A tiny 4.5 centimeter scratch on a metal wall, a hole no bigger than the tip of a pen. Think about that for a moment. A $100 billion space station, the absolute pinnacle of human engineering, was saved by a method a sea captain could have used to find a draft in his cabin 1,000 years ago. They didn't need a supercomputer. They needed a brilliant human mind and a cup of tea. It is the ultimate unglamorous and absolutely heroic truth of life on the frontier. When the most advanced technology in the universe fails, survival comes down to the cleverness and resourcefulness of the pioneers on the ground. We've just seen a problem that stretched for weeks get solved with a humble tea bag, an incredible triumph of human cleverness over a single tiny flaw. But what happens when the enemy isn't a single flaw? What happens when the enemy is the entire structure itself? When the problem isn't a wound you can patch, but the slow, inevitable creep of old age. Think about the International Space Station like any other magnificent machine. It came with a warranty. The world's best engineers designed and certified it to last for 15 years. It was an audacious, optimistic goal. Here's the stark fact. The station blew past that 15-year warranty years ago. It has been continuously inhabited for over 2 decades. It is, by every engineering standard, on borrowed time. But here's the truly terrifying part that keeps mission planners awake at night. The threat isn't that a huge module will suddenly crack in half. The real danger is far more insidious. It's in the seams, the joints, the thousands of feet of high-grade aluminum seals that connect the different modules, holding the life-sustaining atmosphere in and the lethal vacuum of space out. And these seals are being attacked by a silent, relentless killer, metal fatigue. Picture a paperclip. Bend it once, it's fine. Bend it 10 times, it's still strong. But bend it back and forth over and over and you know what happens. The metal weakens, becomes brittle, and eventually it snaps. Now, remember those 16 sunrises and sunsets the station endures every single day? That 500-degree temperature swing? That is the station bending. Every 90 minutes it expands and contracts, putting stress on every single one of those critical aluminum seals, bending the paperclip over and over thousands of times. So how do our heroes fight this? How do you repair old age? You can't. This isn't a leak you can find with a tea bag or plug with epoxy. This is a battle fought on the ground with complex statistical models and predictive analysis. Engineers are no longer asking if a seal could fail. They're calculating when the probability of a catastrophic explosive decompression becomes an unacceptable risk. It is the ultimate unglamorous, gut-wrenching truth of the station today. These pioneers are not just living in the most advanced outpost in human history. They are living in an aging masterpiece, pushing it far beyond its intended life. Their courage and the frantic calculations of an army of engineers on the ground, the only things holding the line against the inevitable tick of a clock made of metal. We've confronted the brutal reality that the station's very metal bones are aging, bending under a stress that will one day break them. It is a structure on borrowed time. But if the bones are getting old, what about the brain? The station's nervous system? You see the pictures. Astronauts floating with sleek modern laptops, managing experiments on high-resolution touchscreens. It all looks cutting edge. But that is a digital illusion. Picture this. An astronaut floats in the Destiny module typing commands on a brand new powerful laptop. But that laptop is just a glorified keyboard and monitor. It's a talking head. The commands it sends don't go to another modern computer. They travel through a web of cables to the station's real brain, its command and control processors, the very chips that manage power, life support, and station attitude. And here's the mind-blowing, almost unbelievable fact. Many of these core processors are Intel 8SO 386. That's a chip from 1985. The brain of the most advanced outpost in human history has less processing power than a singing birthday card from the year 2000. So why on earth, or off it, wouldn't they just upgrade? The answer is the station's most terrifying paradox, because those ancient computers are proven, they are battle-hardened, they have run flawlessly for decades in a high-radiation environment that would fry a modern smartphone in months. They are so deeply woven into the station's DNA that performing a brain transplant would be impossibly risky. But here's the truly brutal part. How do you make a brand new laptop talk to a computer from the 1980s with a breathtaking amount of digital duct tape? For every new piece of technology that comes aboard, engineers have to create a fragile bridge to the past. The new laptops run special software called emulators, which essentially pretend to be an ancient, slow computer, so the old systems will recognize them. They connect a $1,000 laptop to a $1 billion life support system using a tangle of custom-built cables, serial port adapters, and dongles you couldn't even buy anymore. It is a constant, unglamorous war against technological obsolescence. The heroes of the ISS are not just scientists and pilots. They are digital archaeologists, master translators coaxing a conversation between two different centuries just to keep the lights on. It's one more incredible hidden truth. The future of humanity in space is literally held together by the digital equivalent of string and glue. So we've battled the station's aging metal body and its obsolete digital brain. We've seen heroes triumph over hardware failures and software glitches. But what happens when the most complex, unpredictable, and potentially volatile system on board begins to malfunction? A system not made of wires and processors, but of human beings. This isn't a story of mutiny or a Hollywood-style conflict. The threat is far more subtle, and in a sealed can hurtling through space infinitely more toxic. We're talking about the social friction of mess. Picture this. You've just spent an entire morning wrestling with a faulty experiment rack, a job that required intense focus and precision. You're physically and mentally drained. You float over to the galley area to prepare your next meal, but you can't. The space is cluttered with someone else's half-finished work. A tablet, a logbook, and a used utensil are floating, untethered, right where you need to be. On Earth, this is a minor annoyance, a simple eye roll. You can walk away, go to another room, step outside for some fresh air. But in space, there is no other room, there is no outside, or you're trapped. And that floating utensil isn't just inconsiderate. It's a direct violation of the discipline that keeps everyone alive. A discipline we've seen is absolutely critical. It's an object that could vanish into a vent, a distraction that could cause a more serious error, an item that is now officially lost to the all-knowing inventory management system. But here's the truly brutal, unglamorous part. You can't just snap, "Hey, clean up your mess." Your crewmates are your entire world. They are your rescue party, your doctors, your friends, and your only support system for 6 long months. A single, sharp confrontation can create a psychological rift that is impossible to heal, poisoning the morale of the entire expedition. The stress of not saying anything, of politely navigating another person's carelessness day after day, becomes a heavy, silent weight. So how do our heroes fight an enemy that lodges itself inside their own heads? Not with technology. The solution is one of the most important and difficult skills an astronaut must master: expeditionary behavior. This isn't a rulebook, it's a code, it's a form of extreme emotional discipline. It's the learned ability to be hyper-aware of your impact on others, to communicate with absolute respect even when you're frustrated, and to maintain your own impeccable standards so you never become the source of friction yourself. It's about swallowing your pride, having the grace to gently remind a crewmate, and the humility to accept that reminder when you're the one at fault. It is a constant, invisible, and absolutely heroic struggle, fought not against the vacuum of space, but against basic human nature. And it proves that in the end, the most difficult part of surviving on the final frontier isn't the engineering, it's the humanity. We've seen our heroes navigate the social minefield of a cluttered galley, a triumph of human discipline. We've seen them patch tiny leaks, fix ancient computers, and fight off metal fatigue. These are all battles in a war they can, for now, win. But what happens when a part of the station is so old, so wounded, that it can't be saved? What do you do when a part of your own home begins to die, and all you can do is watch? This is the grim, unglamorous reality of the dead module dilemma, and it's happening right now. We've talked about the leaks in the aging Russian Zvezda module, the ones found with a tea bag and sealed with epoxy. But those were just symptoms. The disease is age. After more than 2 decades of relentless thermal stress, some sections of the station's oldest hardware are simply giving up the ghost. The metal is tired. The seals are failing. Picture this. You're an astronaut. You float past a specific hatch, but this one is different. It's sealed. Not for an experiment, but for good. On it, a stark warning. You're forbidden to enter. Behind that door isn't a storage closet, it's a ghost zone. A section of the station that can no longer reliably hold air. A room that is slowly, permanently being surrendered back to the vacuum of space. But here's the truly gut-wrenching part that transforms this from a problem into a psychological burden. You can't just seal the door and forget it. That dead module is still physically bolted to the living, breathing heart of the station. A catastrophic failure on its side of the hatch, a sudden structural collapse, could rip through the connecting bulkhead and destroy everything. So how do our heroes manage a threat they can't fix? They become watchmen. It's a long, silent, nerve-wracking vigil. On their schedules, a new task appears. Check the pressure gauges on the sealed hatches, monitor the thermal sensors, listen for any new telltale groans from the decaying structure. They are forced to stand guard over the station's own graveyard, constantly taking the pulse of a corpse that is still attached to them. Think about that for a moment. Living and working alongside a forbidden, decaying wing of your own home. A constant physical reminder that this magnificent machine is mortal. It is the ultimate unglamorous, heroic struggle. Not against a sudden danger to be overcome, but against the slow, unstoppable creep of time itself. We've stood watch with our heroes as they guard the station's own graveyard, a dead module sealed off from the living, a constant grim reminder that time is the one enemy that cannot be defeated with a wrench or a software patch. This isn't a single, isolated problem. It is the station's final, unglamorous truth. We've seen it in the metal bones of the structure, bending and groaning with fatigue after more than 2 decades of cosmic whiplash. We've seen it in the digital brain, a system running on processors from the 1980s, held together by the digital equivalent of duct tape. The International Space Station, this $100 billion pinnacle of human achievement, is getting old. It is fighting a battle against entropy that one day it will lose. So as the station ages, as the cracks spread and the ghost zones multiply, does that diminish the mission? Does it mean that the daily struggle against the dust, the noise and the clutter is all for nothing? Not even close. In fact, it is what makes the entire endeavour more heroic than we ever imagined. The real story of the ISS today isn't about building a new frontier, it's about the staggering human courage it takes to hold that frontier on borrowed time. It's about the unglamorous, absolutely breathtaking resilience of the men and women who look at an aging, groaning, leaking outpost and don't see a museum piece. They see a home, they see a laboratory, they see humanity's foothold in the cosmos, and they have decided it is worth defending minute by minute with every tool they have. From the very beginning, we said the miracle of the ISS wasn't the technology, it's the people, and now you see why. We've seen them fight mutant mold with disinfectant wipes, find catastrophic leaks with a tea bag, perform open-heart surgery on their own life support, and navigate the social friction of living in a sealed can. Each of these acts is a testament not just to their skill, but to their spirit. They are not just scientists and pilots. They are the vigilant guardians of a dream, proving that even when the metal gets tired, the human will to explore, to endure, and to push forward does not. They are living in an aging masterpiece, and by their daily heroic acts of maintenance and sheer grit, they are keeping it alive. They are the heroes of the unglamorous, and their legacy is written not in the stars but in every patch they apply, every filter they change, and every single extra day they give us on the final frontier. If you're inspired by the unyielding spirit of these modern-day pioneers, show your respect by typing Pioneer in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe, because their incredible story is far from over.